Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. I realize the date on our first slide says March, so forgive me for that. I forgot to change that over. This is our April 2025 session of Daring to Learn, the Daring to Learn webinar series. My name is Alaina Boyd. You guys may recognize me from the reminder emails about this webinar series. I will be presenting this morning. Today we're going to be talking about principles of visual branding for consistent digital marketing. So we'll start to move through these slides here. Just a little bit about me as we get started this morning. Like I said, you may recognize me from those reminder emails you get every month about Daring to Learn. My name is Alaina Boyd. Like I said, I am an extension assistant in the Center for Profitable Agriculture. We are a department in UT Extension as part of the University of Tennessee. And in my role, I focus mostly in value-added agriculture marketing. Our office is based in Columbia, Tennessee. So my background is in communication and information, mostly in this digital marketing space. Just a little bit of information about CPA for those of you that are unfamiliar. So as I said, the Center for Profitable Agriculture is a formal partnership between UT Extension and the Tennessee Farm Bureau. And we also work very closely with the Tennessee Department of Agriculture. So if any of you are familiar with your county extension office, or if you've got young ones in 4-H, we are part of UT Extension. Some faces you may recognize from our center. This is our value-added team. So some of these folks you may recognize, they work in different areas of value-added agriculture, do different things here in our center. I know Megan has spoke before on different Daring to Learn sessions, so you may recognize some of these faces. Moving right along now into the rest of our slides, just a little disclaimer as we get started. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things today, some different websites and platforms, and this is just a reminder, this presentation is strictly for informational purposes only. So anything we talk about in the slide set, this is just for education. There is no endorsement at all from any of our center staff. So keep that in mind. A quick overview of some of the things we'll touch on in this session related to visual branding. We're going to answer the question of what is visual branding, talk a little bit about visual branding strategy, and then I have some helpful things that I think you guys all need to know related to this visual branding concept. So to kind of get us started here, I want to answer that question of what is visual branding. Some of you may have heard this term before. It may be new to you. It may even be kind of self-explanatory. This idea of visual branding, this consists of all of the visual elements associated with your brand or your farm business's identity. So we'll look at some examples of those elements in just a second. So as I said, visual branding consists of all those visual elements associated with your brand or your business. So this would include your logo, if you have one, color palettes, typography. So those are going to be the fonts that you choose. Maybe you work with a specific font regularly in either maybe you've got a website or you make content for social media and use fonts on those flyers or those images. Your imagery, so those would be any kind of photos or kind of imagery you have associated with your brand. We'll look at some really good examples of brand imagery later on in these slides. Also graphics. So maybe you have something really specific to your business, like if any of you guys are UT fans, the checkerboard that you see a lot of Tennessee fans wear, or you see on Tennessee branded items, that would count as a graphic. Your web design, so your website or any of your online presence, your social media profiles, social media accounts, that sort of thing, specifically for the business would count as visual branding. And then any kind of interior or physical design, maybe you've got a brick and mortar store or you use a very specific kind of design or maybe color patterns in your farmer's market stand, or you have some sort of a space set up in a retail shop, that all falls into that visual branding as well. So, why does this visual branding matter? It matters for a couple of reasons, and the biggest one is to help those customers recognize you, whether that's online or on the shelf. I've got a couple of examples on this slide of some brands that, in my opinion, I think do visual branding very, very well. I talk about Coca-Cola a lot in a lot of these digital marketing sessions that I've done for Daring to Learn. I think they're a really good example of a recognizable brand. They are really spot on and being consistent with that red color, the classic cursive font that they use. Coke is a really recognizable, I think, around the world, but especially in the United States. Um, so visual branding matters because it helps those customers, like I said, recognize you across all platforms, whether that's in person, online, on the shelf, anywhere that they might encounter your brand or your products. Um, Visual branding can also help folks to continue to recognize you, and hopefully lead them to become returning customers in the future. Your visual branding should really be visually appealing and appropriate for your target audience. So, the neat thing about everybody on this call, if you have a business or a brand, your target audience is going to be different. You may have some similarities, but there's not really a one size fits all approach for those target audiences. So, what works for one brand may not work for the other. Ideally, that visual branding should be purposeful, um, to kind of resonate with that target audience, because we hope that those customers will form a positive emotional response to your brand and a connection through those visual elements. So, another example that I've got up here is the Barbie brand. Barbie kind of encompasses more than maybe just the Barbie dolls that you might have played with growing up, or maybe you've got children that play with those. So Barbie is a brand. I think that pink color really stands out, and you think of all the things that tie into that Barbie brand. When you see that logo in your mind, you're able to see all the other things associated with Barbie as a brand, and rather than just seeing the logo. So we know that because we've seen Barbie through the years, whether in pop culture or, like I said, maybe you grew up playing with them or you have children that play with them. So we have a kind of connection to those brands in some way. Yeti Coolers is another good example of a brand that plays really well into this visual branding concept. We'll look at some examples later of brands that really play into using imagery and photos to tell stories. I think Yeti is a good example of that, in addition to some other brands that we'll look at later. So again, still on this kind of question of why does visual branding matter? This is a graphic, almost a quote from MailChimp. They are a newsletter company. They focus on a lot of email and text message marketing, and they answer the question, or kind of give this response for the importance of visual branding, and encourage you to think of visual branding as a way to tell a deeper story about your business. We'll talk a lot about brand storytelling through your visual branding here in a couple slides, but think of all these elements of visual branding that you may have, a logo, your color palette, your social media. Think of those as all the different touch points that your customers are going to interact with. And hopefully those will be meaningful and sort of have a purpose behind those. So your customer will continue to um, kind of build a relationship with that visual branding because that storytelling is really important and it can continue to bring customers back to you um, in the future. So, we talked a little bit earlier about making sure that you created visual branding with your target audience in mind. And you may kind of have questions of, okay, how do I do that? Um, One easy way to create your visual branding in line with your target audience is to do some research onto who that target audience is going to be. One piece of advice I would give you is to kind of have your target audience identified before you start to make any of these visual branding choices. Because if you create your logo first and then you get down the road, maybe in a couple years or in a year or so, and you find out this logo does not match with the target audience that interact with my products, then you may have to make some adjustments to some of your branding, maybe your brand identity down the road. Um, so kind of keep that in mind. And one thing, just another housekeeping thing I didn't mention to you guys earlier. I apologize to break in the middle of our slides. We've had a couple more people join. If you guys have questions along the way, I turned on the chat feature. So if at any time you have a question, feel free to pop one of those into that chat box as we're moving through. There's also a Q&A feature you guys should be able to see. So if I need to go back to something or answer a question, feel free to stop me and I'll answer that as we move through. But back to our discussion on target audiences. Um, One way that you can kind of find your target audience or maybe tweak that target audience as you move forward in your business journey. Really rely on that customer feedback, whether that's going to be digital or through traditional word of mouth. There are what we call social listening techniques that you can use to kind of stay on top of that feedback, what folks are saying in your community or online about your brand. We talk a lot about social listening in another session of Daring to Learn and that strategy for social media tactics. So we won't harp too much on that today, but that is just one way to kind of curate your target audience. There are other customer research that you can dive into, whether with Google Trends, you can see what's trending in your area, your state, or your region to kind of help you curate what we call customer personas. So creating these customer personas is one way that you can sort of identify the target audience for your brand. Maybe you have multiple customer personas and you need to alter some of your marketing strategies to fit those personas. We see that a lot in social media marketing, especially with generations. You might have younger generations on your Instagram or your TikTok, so you can change maybe some of your visual branding or your marketing techniques to fit those younger folks on those platforms versus maybe you have older or more mature audiences on like Facebook or a website or some other channel. So you can kind of keep that in mind as we move forward. Um, and the target audience for every person is going to be different. So, this next slide, I want to take a second to talk with you guys about how visual branding might be different based on which facet of your business that we're kind of talking about or taking a look at. So, I use this example a lot of maybe you're an agritourism operator, so you have a farm store or some sort of an agritourism venue at one part of the farm, but then you also have a wedding venue. uh, when we talk about social media marketing, we talk about how it's okay to have a social media presence for maybe the agritourism side and then a separate social media presence for that wedding venue. The visual branding for those two facets of your business can also be different. So maybe the color palette that you use for the wedding venue differs from the farm store. Maybe it's a little bit more romantic. Maybe your catering, maybe your target audience for the wedding venue is brides. So you're going to rely more on some of those romantic kind of colors, pink, purple. Um, Maybe you use imagery more related to marketing that wedding venue versus with the farm store, you would want to maybe use visual branding that ties back to the farm, maybe the country life, the countryside. So kind of keep that in mind also. There's not necessarily a right or wrong for this. I would say all the things that we're going to talk about are more so best practices. So I'm not the visual branding police. I'm not going to necessarily tell you you're wrong if you use the same visual branding for your farm store and your wedding venue. You just may be a little bit more successful if you tweak those for those two sides of your operation, because just like we talked about, target audiences are different for every producer. Your target audience for your wedding venue and your target audience for your farm store are not necessarily going to always be the same people. So now we're going to move into some visual branding element examples. These next couple of slides are going to look mostly at University of Tennessee examples. So we use a lot of orange around here. I think we're all ball sports fans for the most part. So um, if you're not, bear with us because these next couple slides, like I said, will be pretty orange. I like to use UT's visual branding as an example because the university has a very well thought out and documented brand style guide. So we have really nice examples of all these visual branding elements from UT, and it makes it a little bit easier to share those with you guys as we move through. So like I said earlier, all things from the fonts that you use to the pictures that you use, this imagery all counts as visual branding. And of course, the logo. I would argue in a lot of spaces that the logo is the most important element of your visual branding because typically that logo is going to be what folks see and recognize more so than anything else. We'll move forward now and look a little bit more in depth into some of these visual branding elements. So like I was just talking about logos, I would say that logos are probably the most important visual branding element that you can use. I have 5 different examples on this slide. I like to use these because these are all 5 different entities within the University of Tennessee system, but UT does a really good job of tying all these logos back into one another so that you can tell, even though they're all different, maybe departments or organizations within the university, you can tell they're all still the same, whether that's through the use of the Tennessee orange or the power T, or it says UT. I think UT is a great example of uh, trying to be consistent in that visual branding, even though some of the facets of the organization are different. And we also talked about color palettes as another example of visual branding. So again, these are colors pulled from the UT Institute of Agriculture. So our extension service, UT Extension, is a part of that Institute of Ag. So we use these colors a lot in lots of different things. You probably recognize this green on some of our CPA marketing. This is just one example of a color palette. Now, yours does not necessarily have to be, you don't have to have this many colors. I would say maybe this main color palette here, if you could shoot for 3 to maybe 4 colors associated with your brand, I would say that's fine. You don't have to have all these extras. These are our specific unit colors for the different units inside the Institute of Agriculture. So this is just an example. You're not necessarily bound or need to have I think this is 10 colors in total, so you don't need that many. I would shoot for 3 as a maybe a sweet spot for color palettes. And typography, we talked a little bit about that already, used Coca-Cola as that example. So any of the fonts that you use associated with your brand will all fall into that typography. If you were in our recent session for the principles of layout and design, we talked a lot about typography, about font families in that slide set. We won't go that deep today at all, but just kind of keep in mind the fonts that you use can build on the visual branding that you use for your business. And we've got a couple of different examples on here, even the script for the baseball team, the Power T, and then this font here, this is called Gotham. We use Gotham in all of our university publications, graphics, that kind of thing. Actually, the fonts up here on my PowerPoint slides are also Gotham. So we use that on purpose to be as consistent as we can across the board in all areas of work that we do for UT. Imagery, we talked a little bit about that already as a visual branding element. Kind of keep this in mind. Your brand imagery, the pictures that you use, is not the same thing as your brand image. So those are two different things. But your brand imagery just continues to help tell that visual story of your brand through style, tone, customer perception, that kind of thing. Your brand imagery can include other things besides pictures, so that can be textures or illustrations. We talked about that UT checkerboard towards the beginning of this session. User-generated content, so any kind of photos that your customers take. Maybe you've got an agritourism operation, they take pictures on your farm and post those online. That counts as brand imagery, helping to tell that brand story. Your social media content, and also any flyers or printed marketing materials also count towards imagery in this visual branding sense. Graphics is another one. This kind of goes hand in hand with imagery, because graphics can be considered imagery, so it gets a little confusing. But when we talk about graphics, these could include lots of different things, from texture to shape, specific patterns, icons. I use this little torchbearer icon as an example. Negative and positive space. We won't talk about space at all in this session. If you're unfamiliar with that or kind of want more information, that principles of layout and design session also goes really in depth into negative and positive space, and also formatting. Maybe you format your website or your social media images or your printed marketing materials in a very specific way, so that formatting can become part of your visual branding. Your website and any kind of content that you put out into the digital space. So your social media platforms, Facebook or Instagram, all those tie into your visual branding also. So these are examples from the center's Instagram here. This is a screenshot of our Instagram feed at one point in time. A screenshot here from our Facebook page, and of course our website here in the back. So notice that we're really consistent across the board with the colors that we use. The imagery kind of aligns. We try to be consistent in all this digital visual branding that we use, because it's really important to try to be as consistent as you can, because that just continues to help customers recognize you, or your clients recognize you, whether you're posting on social media or on your website. And lastly, those physical elements. So we talked about maybe you've got a really specific storefront or a really specific layout that you use in your farmers market setup. Or anywhere that you might have physical marketing materials, you want to be consistent in that visual branding with those also. So in 2023, our center's 25th anniversary was in September, and we did a lot that year as far as kind of physical marketing materials, kind of trying to promote and celebrate that event. So notice we use that same kind of green color pattern across the board. We're really consistent in using our logos, trying to use that Gotham font that we talked about as much as we can to tie in that visual branding in our physical materials as well. So now we're going to move into kind of this concept of brand storytelling. So brand storytelling is something that you can use in either your physical or your digital marketing efforts once you get your visual branding down pat. So the example that I'll use over these next couple of slides is the brand Patagonia. Patagonia is an outdoor company. You may be familiar with them, you may not. They make backpacks, tents, clothes, that kind of thing. Lots of really outdoor gear. And for as long as I have been familiar with the brand, they have always used this sort of mountain background, this specific font, and this color scheme here. So they've been very, very consistent in the use of that logo and those colors. But they tell a story through their visual branding. Notice, then this may be kind of hard to see because I stacked screenshots on top of each other. This was a screenshot from their Instagram feed that I took today. Patagonia relies really heavily on pictures of outdoor life, people backpacking, people fishing, people hiking, camping, any kind of outdoor activity. They rely on that brand imagery to tell their brand story because their whole focus is creating outdoor gear for people to be out in nature. They're very passionate about conservation and protecting the earth, and they use that brand imagery to tell their story. Same thing, I think, with a lot of their patterns on their clothing and their products. Notice these look like these are men's shorts here. They have fish on them, and there's flowers on this backpack, and they try to pull a lot of inspiration from nature and kind of that brand commitment to the outdoors, and continue to tell that story of, oh, we are an outdoor clothing brand. We are a brand that's really committed to conservation. They do that really well through their branding. One thing that I think that's really cool with Patagonia also is they have all these funky patterns. So it's not always fish or flowers, but sometimes it's a lot of zigzags, or maybe it's kind of an abstract pattern that's meant to sort of look like a mountain. They do a really good job of using patterns on their products. So that way, when you're out in public and you see somebody wearing a pair of shorts, most of the time, if I see something in a funky pattern like this, I know, oh, that's got to be Patagonia, because they do a really good job of tying those graphics and those textures. And when we talk about texture, sort of from this visual branding, or especially from a digital marketing sense, when we say texture, we mean patterns. Because with digital, you can't really feel a texture, but we just mean patterns in that sense. So normally, if you see something like that, I would say, oh yeah, that's got to be Patagonia. I think those patterns and those textures really play into their brand identity and brand storytelling. So here is a screenshot from that Patagonia website. Like I said, they do a really, really good job of promoting, hey, we're an outdoor brand. We're a company that makes clothing and gear for outdoor people. Another big thing with Patagonia, and I think they really tie into this brand storytelling well, their gear is on the expensive side.
but it's made to be used. So I have come into some Patagonia products, secondhand. Those things are heavy duty. And they're really, really proud that their products are meant to last a lifetime. You see, this screenshot I pulled from their website actually today says for a lifetime of comfort. In a lot of their branding and marketing efforts, you will see them use that lifetime or made for life, just really trying to get the point across that their gear is tough on purpose because they want you to use those products over and over and over instead of buying maybe a new pair of hiking pants or a new jacket every year. They want you to use it forever. Um, so they use a lot of these really nice pictures, professional pictures of people out in the wild to continue to tell that story about their products. And it ties in with their brand. It makes sense that a guy wearing a Patagonia outfit is kind of hanging out between these two trees. If they use the same picture of maybe this guy hanging out like this between two like walls, maybe in a city, it wouldn't necessarily make sense because that doesn't tie back in to their visual brand. So this use of imagery with trees, being outside, being on the water, um, hiking, all that ties back into the story that they're trying to tell of, hey, I'm an outdoor brand. They also do a another really good job of continuing to tell that brand story through their what they call Patagonia worn wear. And this says source Center for Profitable Agriculture on that. Ignore that. I copied this slide from another one. This whole idea behind the Patagonia Worn Wear initiative is, again, they want you to wear those products for a lifetime. So look at the picture of this guy in his Patagonia puffy jacket. Like I said, these are a little bit on the expensive side. They're not cheap if you buy them brand new. But the story behind this image is this guy's probably had this jacket a long time. Think of how many years or how many seasons he has worn that specific jacket. They talk about every hole, every patch has a story behind it. They want you to wear those stories in their gear, similar to some other outdoor brands that are becoming really popular lately. You can send your Patagonia gear back to them and they will repair it. They'll put it back together, which I think is really neat. It continues to tell that brand story of, oh, we want our commitment to sustainability to stand out to you. We really want you to use our gear over and over as opposed to buying a new jacket every single season. So they really relied on this picture of this guy to tell the story of their Patagonia Worn Wear initiative. And I think even if they didn't have these memories here, even if it was just the picture of him alone, that piece of visual branding using that brand imagery tells enough of a story by itself. Because they say that pictures are worth 1,000 words. I think that's absolutely true. That tells enough of a story by itself. We may not even need this text over here or the logo to understand the point they were trying to make with this picture. So, kind of moving away from those examples into now talking more about creating a brand style guide. So once you guys get to the point where you have identified your visual branding elements, so all those things we talked about earlier, logos, color palettes, fonts, pictures, kind of the story that you want to tell, you will hopefully get to a point where you're ready to put them together into what we call a brand style guide. And I want you guys to think about these brand style guides as kind of the roadmap for your visual branding. I've talked about this in some in-person workshops that we've done recently, and we got a really good question asking, who is the brand style guide for? And the purpose of your brand style guide is for somebody say you have a intern working on the farm for the summer, or you hire a social media person, or you work with an outside marketing firm. The situation behind a brand style guide is so that you can take that, maybe it's a document, maybe it's a book, maybe it's just a single, key bullet points that you have written on a sticky note that you can hand to someone and say, okay, these are the guidelines that I want my branding, my visual branding to follow, so that whoever is making that marketing content for you can take that style guide and not need little to no direction going forward. So they would be able to ideally make, social media images, make changes to your website, maybe do written documents if you get to a point where you have very specific style and tone in your kind of written materials. So that's the idea behind a brand style guide. I've got a couple examples of what these might look like over the next couple of slides. One that I really push a lot for folks is the Canva brand kit. So we've talked about Canva already in our recent Daring to Learn session. We went through that Canva Can Do session. So if you're not familiar with Canva, I would encourage you to look back on that recorded session. If you are an avid user of Canva, maybe you've seen these Canva brand kits before, I would encourage you to use these if Canva is a tool that is already in your marketing arsenal. These Canva brand kits are really simple to make. I have several that I've made for different projects or groups that I work with a lot. So of course I have one for Daring to Learn. You see I use these specific colors for Daring to Learn very often. We have our little logo, our little search bar. Then of course the center CPA has different colors. I work with a lot of dairy farmers on the Southeast Dairy Business Innovation Initiative. SDBII has different graphics and logos and colors that we use. So um, we talked about that agritourism versus the wedding venue earlier. You can make a brand kit for each facet of that business inside Canva. And it's relatively simple to do. You can be as detailed as you want, or it can be as simple as these are the colors, these are the logo. Maybe if you wanted to choose fonts, you could, but there's space to add in photos, to add in graphics, all sorts of other really in-depth kind of options that you can build into that Canva brand kit. So this is one way to make a style guide. Another example that I have for you that could be really simple. You could even do this in like Microsoft Word, or I don't know if any of you guys play around in Pinterest. Pinterest has a collage feature now where you can kind of make a mood board sort of similar to this. I made this in Canva, and unfortunately, I had to break it into two screenshots because it's the same size as a sheet of paper. So if I were to print it off, this would have been an 8.5 by 11. But to make it fit on this PowerPoint slide, I had to make it into two screenshots. So if this brand mood board example is something that you would be interested in using to make a brand style guide, it could be something as simple as, okay, here's my logo. I also put in our value added graphic on here. This is not our official logo. We just use it on so many things. I included it. We've got our kind of our core colors, and then of course our fonts. There's that Gotham font I talked about earlier. And sort of the idea behind a mood board is to take pictures, and you can draw inspiration from those pictures. I've even seen some folks when maybe they're kind of in the process of doing their customer personas, or they're still working on identifying their target audience. You may start with just a mood board with pictures of what you think are associated with your brand or your business. So maybe using that wedding venue example again, you may use pictures of wedding dresses or pictures of bouquets, that kind of thing, to incorporate into your mood board. And then maybe you can build all this other stuff out later. So you can start with a little bit more of an abstract sort of example, or some abstract ideas, and then build all these other pieces out later, if that makes sense. The last kind of style guide example that I wanted to show you guys actually comes from the University of Tennessee. And I show you this on purpose because you can get super, super detailed with a brand style guide and with your visual branding, but you don't have to. Like I said earlier, I'm not the visual branding police. There's really no right or wrong. You may eventually get to the point where you have enough visual branding guidelines that you need to add in all these elements. Um, I know for UT, we've got our brand pillars. It talks a lot about what it means to be a volunteer. We have all these other standards, like for email and social media, all the ways that the university presents kind of to the public. But like I said, yours does not have to be this detailed. If you get to a point in the future where you have this much information, great. I would encourage you to write it down somewhere. Whether you build that book at a time, if it's as simple as maybe a folder you keep in the office, or something that you have stored on your phone, I would encourage you to keep up with it and keep track of it. And this style guide can change over time, just like your target audience can change over time. So you may start with sort of very specific things in your style guide, and 5 or 10 years down the road, that may not fit anymore. So it's okay if that changes. But the biggest thing with style guides is if you go to the effort of creating it, keep up with it. So again, some tips for creating that style guide. Some of these things I've already touched on. Really know what your brand stands for. Know your target audience before you try to tackle these things, because some of these style guide or visual branding elements can be tough to figure out until you know your target audience. That's okay. If you get to a point where you need to have your own design language or editorial standards, we have one producer who, when they talk about their customer personas, they call them something really specific. So if you have sort of a specific name for things that may not be like an industry standard, so maybe you hire a marketing firm or a social media person, and if you don't think they would immediately know what that means, keep that sort of design language in your style guide so that they'll know what you mean when you talk about, whatever that may be. If you get to a point where you have editorial standards, maybe you're writing or sending a lot of things to your local newspaper. If you get to that point, there's really no right or wrong. Pick one and stick to it would be my best advice as far as editorial goes for kind of writing. And create examples to keep your team consistent. So really, the more examples you can have of the way you want things to look, I think the more beneficial a style guide would be for you going forward. This can also be really helpful in succession planning. So say that maybe you're getting to the point where you're ready to pass the baton on to somebody else to either take over the business or take over the farm. If you have examples of how you want that to continue to look down the road, be ready to share those with them, because that can continue to help the brand be consistent no matter who is making that content. And just a couple things on how you can take your style or your visual branding and turn that into actionable strategy. Like I mentioned earlier, if you go through all the time and effort of creating visual branding and a brand style guide, really use that. I think it's a disservice to you and to your business if you go through all that effort and then don't use it. Or if you pick colors and then decide next week, oh, these don't work. So really try to be as consistent as you can across the board. If you're going to use brand imagery or specific graphics, try to use those on your website or in social media or wherever you're going to post those. Be as consistent as possible. Use the same logo, the same colors, the same everything on all kind of areas where you would market that business. Now, if it's the example like with the wedding venue versus the agritourism operation we talked about earlier, that's okay for those to be different, but you want the specific visual branding elements that you make for that one specific facet of the business to be consistent across the board on wherever you're going to market that piece. So we're kind of wrapping up here, talking about visual branding strategy. Again, I feel like I could shout it from the rooftops, but we really can't say it enough. Be consistent, be consistent, be consistent, be consistent across every single platform you're going to use. Like I said earlier, if you create a style guide, stick to it. Don't spend all that time putting those resources or that information together just to not use it. Try to keep things simple, but just because it's simple doesn't mean it does not have to be memorable. So you don't necessarily have to go all out. Less can be more when it comes to a lot of these visual branding and design aspects. And be very intentional with how you use your visual branding. So we used that Patagonia example earlier. Patagonia is very, very intentional with the content that they share, the pictures that they use, the colors that they use. Try to also keep that in the back of your mind. You want to be intentional with anything that you use in your visual branding because you want that to resonate with your target audience at the end of the day. And the big one, know your target audience before you start this process. It can be very difficult to start to create a logo and a color palette and all these other things just to find out when you get a couple months or maybe a year down the road that your target audience doesn't resonate with that information. So we've got some time for some questions. We finished up a little bit early, so for those of you that are still with us, if you have questions, feel free to ask those now. If we missed anything earlier during the blip where my sound went out, feel free to let me know. I can go back to whatever slide we need to look at. The chat box is open for you guys. So feel free to send questions my way. And while we're here, another housekeeping thing before folks jump off. I didn't talk about this at the beginning of the session. This is my contact information if anyone needs it. It will also be in the follow-up email that I send after the session today. If this is your first time being on a Daring to Learn session, we have an evaluation and attendance form that we ask you guys to fill out after every session. This evaluation form gives you a chance to give us really helpful feedback about the content that we talked about today, about Daring to Learn in general. It really helps us shape the future of this webinar series and the sessions that we provide. It also gives you a chance, if you are a Tennessee producer, to earn Tennessee Ag Enhancement Program credit. So Daring to Learn does qualify for one educational credit for application B. That's going to be the producer diversification credit for TAEP. That's a cost share program offered through the Tennessee Department of Agriculture. You do have to watch 5 sessions in 2025. So you have until December 31st, the end of this year, to watch those 5 sessions. All you have to do, watch them and fill out the evaluation form, and then your name will be submitted to the Department of Agriculture at the end of the year, meaning that you got credit. So that's one incentive to fill out this evaluation form, but it's also helpful for you guys to give us feedback about the webinar series and individual sessions. So I'll hang out for a couple more minutes. If anybody has questions, feel free to ask those. If not, and you've gotten the information for the evaluation survey, feel free to hop off. We will see you guys in another month. We'll have an extension specialist, Les Humple, from the UT Center for Farm Management, or Center of Farm Management, talking about farm transition planning in May.